Welcome to another episode. Today we're joined by Mislav, who's the co-founder of Klaster. We've briefly talked about chain abstraction before, but today I'm really excited to have this conversation with Mislav because he's deep in the trenches and he can give us an insider's perspective of what's going on in the chain abstraction ecosystem. So thank you for joining, and I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to answer some questions, like open a discussion. I think chain abstraction is still one of those things that's very loosely defined. So I'd just like to preface this with the fact that this is going to be my view of things. There are alternating views developed by alternating teams, and I guess they're all equally valid. We'll see what the market essentially converges to at the end.
Mm-hmm. So I would love to just start with a quick introduction and background. Like, how did you get started in crypto? And also, tell us about the Klaster story.
Yeah. So me personally, I got started in blockchain around 2016. So this was when I started researching Ethereum, how it works. So it was the time of the Golem ICO. So it was when I kind of saw it hit the news. I was like, what? This is interesting. And then 2017, I went full-time into crypto. So essentially, I had a company that I opened with a couple of friends. We did real-world asset tokenization. So it was in 2017, way before it was a big thing. I was focused a lot on R&D also throughout those years on how to achieve certain things in blockchain. But then it was more or less about like a 4 or 5 year pause in like deep R&D, which was more like handling the legal stuff of tokenization, getting projects, onboarding, etc. Unfortunately, that company didn't succeed in any meaningful capacity. We did tokenize a few things. Then we pivoted to developer tooling there and to open source Web3 analytics. Unfortunately, those also kind of didn't take hold. So then that company was shut down, and we were sort of exploring like new things. Everyone was trying to find where they're gonna fit in. And there was this project that a friend of ours was doing with a Chainlink, which was leveraging CCIP to send cross-chain messages. And it was very interesting to me because at that point it was sort of difficult to actually communicate across blockchains. I mean, you had layer 0, you had CCIP and all of these things, but there was no like set standard how things are going to work. So we started exploring. This was like last year around summer, like August or something like that. We started exploring these so-called multi-chain tokens. We built a multi-chain token standard. We were working a little bit with Chainlink. We joined their build program. So basically, I joined this project that the friend was exploring. And yeah, out of this, like throughout a few months of tinkering around, we came up with the first product, which was like a multi-chain safe, Gnosis safe, which was powered by Chainlink CCIP. Unfortunately, this turned out not to be the product that we wanted. It was very slow because we had to wait like 20 minutes for finality. And then, throughout all of this, we started thinking about how there's so many problems in this in multi-chain space. And there are no like meaningful solutions. So I would say around maybe January, February, we committed on a timeline there for let's bring something to market that solves this. And so I would say around March, April this year, we pushed our first version of the application. So this was a chain abstracted wallet where you could essentially, the first product was cross-chain gas, where you could pay in ERC20 tokens on any chain for the execution of actions on any other chain. Then, it was interesting, but there was a few projects already doing that. How do we improve upon it? And, we took a very structured approach. We didn't go with, and I just like, if I can ever give a tip to anyone like starting a company, don't go in with an idea and get married to that idea. So it's just a seed. Like the original idea is just like a motivation, let's call it like that. And then we took a very structured approach. Like, what are the problems? Like, problems are finality, problems are cross-chain composability, problems are, different types of virtual machines like EVM, SVM, Starknet, etc. So the problems are different signing schemes. So you have P256, you have SECPK256K1, whatever it is, like the standard Ethereum signing scheme. And so the idea came, how do we merge these? And one of the things that this is like sort of alpha, but one of the things also that we realized is that it has to work with EOAs at the end of the day. So this is the last part of our research that's it's not public yet, but it was, so how do we solve that? The signing schemes are interoperable. The chains are composable, so you can use the output of a function on one chain as the input of a function on another chain. Gas is shared throughout all of the chains. Gas is paid in the asset which you are interacting with. So if you are using USDC, you pay for gas in USDC, or potentially gas is even sponsored. So there, and we also did a few, let's call it, opinions on what like the future will be. And I know that I see on Twitter you are very active in this part. Like, is it going to be intent solvers? Is it going to be bridges? Is it going to be cross-chain messaging? Like, who's going to win this out? So that's still now an active area of research. As you know, we're like already working with Li.Fi, so we have plugins right now for Li.Fi and across on our in our SDK. But like, we're exploring whether or not it's going to go down like the full solver route, or it's going to go down the full cross-chain messaging route. So who knows? So that's like, in a nutshell. Maybe I took a bit of time, but it's a nutshell how Klaster came about and what our motivation was.
Cool. I think that makes sense, right? Like, I feel the more founders I talk to, the more I realize, like you said, it's just an idea in the beginning, but then you look at small problems that you can actually fix and then go about building a product, right? So
Exactly.
you talked about how you started with Chainlink CCIP, like that was your introduction to Interop in a way, and this was a year ago or something like that. So how has the ecosystem actually changed today that allows something like Cluster to be built, right? Like, what components were not live back then that you could not build a cluster at that time?
I think most components were sort of live back then also, but they were in this early stages of implementation. So one of the things that Cluster does, so Cluster is user-facing, right? So you build apps that users use, and then Cluster essentially needs to tap into liquidity on multiple chains. And what we wanted to not do is use like resource locks or something like that, where you would have to. It's like one problem is, like, we can solve chain abstraction probably very quickly by like not solving it for current users, right? So if we just build a system that's not portable, you have to lock everything in a smart contract, and then there's a solver that's fronting your liquidity everywhere. Like, yeah, we could solve it reasonably quickly, but our idea was it has to work for everyone. It has to work for your average developer, your average user. And then the problem was that bridges are slow. Like, bridges, if you're just wanting to get assets from chain A to chain B, then bridges are fast. Like, 3 minutes, who cares? Like 5 minutes, who cares, right? But if you need to have a responsive user experience that works across multiple blockchains, then bridges are slow. So it's very contextual, right? What you're trying to achieve. And so one of the things that helped us a lot was integration with across. So like even with Li.Fi, when we integrate, we just always go for the fastest option in the SDK. It's just like by default, we should probably be more price sensitive, etc. But now in these demos and everything, like, speed is king. And yeah, I think like one of the problems that we had is a problem that we still have. There still does not exist a reasonably fast bridge with low slippage. Ideally, I would like to see some type of cross-chain messaging protocol, which like uses mint burn. But then you get into finality constraints, and then it just becomes a whole thing. So yeah, I would say like the proliferation of solver networks is something that helped us immensely. But that's because it's a specific case where for us, the user experience is more important than, let's say, maybe getting like 35 or 50 BPS less in execution price.
Mm-hmm. So again, I feel like with Intense, you had faster execution, and that's what you needed for like having a better user experience on every level, right? Like, I feel bridges have also become better because of Intense, at least in terms of speed.
Yeah.
And building on top of that, chain abstraction protocols can today exist that offer a better experience. And like you mentioned, the token frameworks, right? So with our aggregation, you can actually tap into all of these evolving concepts, because a year ago, even token frameworks, like, only a few existed and did not have too much adoption. But today the landscape is very different. And as
Yeah.
finality also changes.
Yeah, with token frameworks, you can see like connects like dropping out of that race and going into a rebalancing business. So yeah, I think there's this whole new ecosystem, and I think like you guys are probably like very close to the center of this ecosystem, which is developing to provide auxiliary services to somebody. So if I'm building a cross-chain like chain abstraction framework, now that I have these auxiliary services reasonably standardized cross-chain tokens, like tapping into Li.Fi to get me quick quotes, to be able to just like reshuffle liquidity around where I need it, then it becomes possible. Because like I don't want to fully vertically integrate, because it's like whole problem of bootstrapping liquidity, getting users, building all the contracts, auditing everything. So I'm liking that the industry is now becoming, and I think it was actually Connext or Everclear who first presented it as like a stack of services, which then interplay with each other to enable chain abstraction.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the Cake framework. That was by the Frontier research team.
No. I was Cake was also Cake was they were first, definitely, but I think Cake was more theoretical in a sense that this is the permissioning layer, this is the execution layer, etc., and I love this. Like I as I said, like I really love research, but I think Everclear, what they did, they like put specific companies. They were like, this you use this you use this, here you use this. Because like at the end of the day, they're infra for infra, right? They're like very deep in the stack. So I think like this puzzle type thing is the best thing. Yeah.
Okay. So now I want to kind of talk about the chain abstraction thesis, right? Like, why did you guys choose to build for chain abstraction, and then what's the expertise in the team that made you guys feel like, okay, we can build the best product in this niche?
So the chain abstraction thing, we started with ourselves. To be honest, it was we were really enjoying using blockchain up to maybe 2019 or 2020, when it was you used ETH to interact with ETH, and then you paid for gas in ETH, and you just had to have one asset and one wallet, and you just signed everything. And there was no switching networks, there was no anything. It was an enjoyable experience, but of course it was not scalable. It had all these issues. But then we kind of saw how time went on, how difficult it became for us to build products. Like let's say in the tokenization company, we did tokenization of loyalty programs for certain sports clubs, and we wanted people to be able to invest wherever their funds are. Why should a USDC on Polygon not be worth as much as a USDC on Ethereum, right? And it was extremely difficult, and so we had all these hacky ways of solving it. It was like one stack on top of another stack. And then for me personally, I started using blockchain less and less, to be honest. It was super annoying. Like I have somebody, so in Croatia, we have this payments processor that you can basically pay everywhere with crypto. But I'd get some funds on my Trust wallet, and then I'd forget to send myself some ETH, and then it wouldn't work. And then I'd have to get my credit card out again, or I'd have it on the wrong network, which was not supported, etc. And like I think the detection was, we tried to be really cynical about ideas, because we don't want to get really married to them. But the conclusion was that this is a major issue. It's horrible to use blockchain. It still is, unfortunately. I mean, I'd love to say that today things are different. If you get a good app with a good UX and like the developers really try to abstract things, it can be reasonably easy. Like I was using the Zora mobile app, and this looks like sort of chain abstracted. But it's on one chain, and I buy with my Apple Pay, some ETH to use it. But a lot of apps, a lot of things are still just nowhere near as usable as they should be. And so to us, it was kind of obvious. There is no mainstream adoption without chain abstraction or whatever you want to call it. Like chain abstraction has become this weird term, but it's more like a broader sense interoperability, right? Where these chains act as a single environment. Like what gave us the confidence, that I always say who was it that gave the quote? I think it's Orson Welles. It's what gave you the confidence, and he said delusion. So we were kind of like, this is a huge problem that the biggest companies are right now not able to solve. Let's just give it a shot. Like and I always like to get this process in my head when we're building a new product. What are the problems? And let's like sketch out possible solutions. But sketch them out in a way where this has to be coded quickly. It has to be in production next month or in 2 months, or like if it's very difficult in 3 months. But it doesn't have to be in production and look nice. It has to be just something that can work. And this is what we do at Klaster. Like we launched on last Christmas. It was this like first CCIP powered thing. Then we scrapped it all, and then we built out the protocol. Then in, let's say, April, we launched the demo. Then we got speaking with some customers. We got some partners onboarded, including you guys, like for the launch. Then in August, we launched the first version. We got like a dozen-ish clients who are now integrating. We listened to them, and now like the third version is coming out very soon. And I'm confident that like a fourth version will be out before New Year. So I think like if you break down the problem in enough small steps, like if the steps are small enough, then like you can solve big problems even if you're a small team. Like it doesn't like if the problem is very complicated, it's complicated because you're looking at the entire problem. Like and you have to just focus on this is the subset that I'm solving, and if I can solve that subset, then this unlocks solutions for the next subset. And just taking things step by step, continually talking to your clients. Like never once should you just go in your head and start thinking that you're the smartest guy around, because you're not. Like your clients know what's best. They know what they need. You don't know what they need. And yeah, let's call it like that. That's how the inspiration came, and then how the confidence to do it came was like maybe from previous experiences of being able to build like bigger things.
Yeah, I mean, getting started is probably the biggest problem, and then you can just iterate on those steps, right? So now I kind of want to get a little bit technical in terms of how Klaster works, because I was going through the docs and the website, and there's a lot of emphasis on orchestration, right? And if you look at all the chain abstraction frameworks, orchestration is like a different category. But I feel like how every protocol in that category does orchestration is also very different, right?
Yes.
So break it down for us, like how does Klaster work, and then how is it different from other protocols? Like what are the other ways to achieve this?
Yeah, so Klaster does, we call it orchestration because to us, essentially, multi-chain or chain abstracted interactions are tapping into multiple execution environments as a single action, right? So my action is, I want to pay you like 50 USDC, but you want money on Optimism, I have it on Arbitrum, right? So then the action that I want to do is not two transactions on two blockchains. The action I want to do is one action, like it's one flow that I want to achieve, but it requires execution on multiple different environments. Like in Web 2, this is almost default. Like when we're using this Restream or whatever is app, it's probably communicating with like 3 different database providers, with load balancing provider. There's a video API, etc. And they're not even thinking about this being some sort of infrastructure abstraction, right, or whatever it is. I click a button that's gonna log me into Facebook or whatever, into Instagram. It communicates with the OAuth provider. It communicates with the database provider. It communicates everywhere it needs to achieve it. And this is what we essentially call orchestration. Orchestrating multiple different service providers to achieve the thing that you need. So how, in our sense, what is orchestration is, I want to deposit 100 USDC on Aave, on Optimism, because the best yield is there. But I have 50 USDC on Base, 35 USDC on Arbitrum, and I don't know, 50 USDC on Polygon, right? So what I'll do, I'll click supply, and then the orchestration part begins, where the developer is able to say, look, this guy has this much here, this much there, blend it, bridge it, supply it. So multiple actions which are interdependent on each other. And I think this is going to be like the default thing. It's quite obvious that there is very few actions that you can do which don't touch at least a few service providers. In Web 2 and Web 3, it's just a general principle of engineering is that this is how it works. So yeah, essentially that's how we view orchestration. Now, how it works behind the surface is we have this Merkle tree object, which we call the interchain transaction. And it contains in its leaves, it contains all the actions that you want to do. And then you hash it again, and you get to the root of the Merkle tree. And this is the interchain transaction hash. And it uniquely defines the action that you want to achieve across all of those execution environments. So essentially then what you do is you send this hash and the data to the node, to the network, essentially. And you say, how much do you want me to pay for you to execute this? And then the node will tell you like, and you say, I'm paying in USDC on Base, right? Something like that. And then the node will tell, look, if you're paying with USDC on Base, and this is the actions that you want, this is how much it's going to cost you. And that includes the gas costs, that includes the fee that our node takes, and any other costs that might be in the transaction. Then you get like 5, 6, 7, 10 of those quotes from different nodes. And then you say, okay, this one is best, right? I'll take this one. And then basically you sign the interchain transaction hash with your private key, with the user's private key, right? And then send it back to the node. The node gets the signed interchain transaction hash, It says, okay, now I've been permitted, because like the validation for the node to actually be allowed to execute this is all done on chain through our validator contracts, and they will check whether or not the data that the node is trying to execute was part of the Merkle tree that you signed. So you sign it, you send it to the node gets it, and then the node signs it again, like your signed ITX, interchain transaction, we call it ITX hash. The node signs it again, which is confirming that the node has committed itself to execute your action. And this is the big part of Klaster, is essentially the node is cryptographically committing that it has to execute this. If they don't, they get slashed. Now, staking and slashing are still not live. We're working on making the protocol live, like it's end of the year or Q1 2025. But the end goal here is that we want to build this trustless environment, permissionless, completely permissionless, where various types of infrastructure providers, like imagine Li.Fi joining as an infrastructure provider in Klaster network, is basically what you would say, look, whenever anyone needs some funds bridged, like we'll do it, and we'll generate this interchain transaction, and we'll generate the hash, and we'll commit to it, and we'll put like $50,000 at stake. And if we, don't do what we said we're going to do, we're going to get slashed, right? And so the great idea about this is if you build this permission, and the proofs that you generate don't always have to be just transactions. They can be intents, they can be ZK proofs, they can be various types of other things. But the cool thing is if you achieve this type of way where everyone who is executing something for you has a stake behind it, where they'll get slashed if they don't do it, then you get this sort of proof composability, right? Where like one node commits to something to me, but they can't fulfill the entire thing, but then they trigger a different node that commits to them. And then is this like recursive thing where you can just compose multiple service providers into this action. And at the end of the day, all of those people guaranteeing all of those cryptographic things and like moving up the tree, it just results in a single hash, which is called the interchain transaction hash. And this is a great abstraction for the developers, because then it's just basically do what I want to achieve. Maybe I'm explicit and I tell you exactly how to do it. Maybe I'm implicit and I just let you figure out as a node how to achieve it. But I always get the same object at the end. Like no matter how many service providers are below me, no matter how complicated the action is, I get one hash and I sign that one hash with a single signature. I permission the network to execute this all for me. And yeah, so that's like what orchestration is, and that's how Klaster works in the background.
So it sounds like the node is the kingmaker here, right? The user kind of delegates all of the actions to the node. So who is running this node? And do you have a good analogy for how people can understand nodes better?
So the network is permissionless. Right now, like you can just run a node and that's it. In the future, you're going to have to put up a stake because you're obviously guaranteeing certain execution parameters. So like our very big goal was that the network must be completely permissionless. Like I shouldn't be able to prevent anyone from joining the network, even if I wanted to. So the node, essentially, the node has its own capital for paying for gas. That's its core thing. But right now, the nodes are essentially they're non-custodial. They don't front liquidity. They don't do anything. You tell them, look, do this, then wait until it's complete, then do this, then wait, or do these two things in parallel. You just tell the node a set of instructions, and it's extremely simple. Through our SDK, you just push it like 5, 6, 7 Ethereum transactions on multiple chains, and just the node complies. It's literally like a type of very, very smart relayer that's able to deduct the flow of actions, what depends on what else. So, okay, I can't do this until I get this. And then you can use state overrides to tell the node to be a bit smarter about it, etc. So the end goal, which I want to get to at some point, is hopefully we get some like pre-confirmation stuff, and then we can also guarantee you the execution and make it atomic. But then that would go against the principle that I outlined earlier, that's not possible to ship quickly. So right now the nodes are essentially non-atomic, so they execute multiple actions. If anything fails in the meantime, there are certain like cleanup functions that you can execute encode in the interchain transaction, and you can replay the transactions and everything. And so also one of the things that we are adding now is composability. In the previous version of the protocol, essentially the input on the destination chain was not composable with the output of the source chain. Yeah, so basically now we're adding composability where whatever the output is on the destination chain and whatever the bridge gives you on the destination chain, this is exactly like to the last decimal. This is exactly the input that's going to be used on the destination chain. So there's a lot of like very interesting problems to solve still. But we have like very good feedback from our clients. They're super happy. They're able to achieve things that that were not possible before. And yeah, so one of the also like negative feedbacks was like the obligation to use smart accounts, and that's why we also did like a lot of R&D to enable it to work with EOAs. And this is something that we're hoping to present very, very soon, and they are very excited about it.
Got it. So like in the cluster network, nodes play a very important role because they're technically doing all the orchestration here, right? So is there like any other alternative approach that people are adopting right now?
Well, there's the solver approach. Basically, you give a set of constraints to an off-chain actor, and you tell them to essentially like, I want to get A tokens, with this yield. Find a way to do it, and then the solvers will do it. I think solvers are a very powerful concept, but just I have a feeling that the design space for solvers is very large, and one of the problems I see there, like solvers, they kind of radically change the notions of how blockchain developers interact with these networks. And I think they're underestimating the complexity that's going to happen when they try to get seasoned developers to switch their mindset, right? So yeah, there's that. There's the other way of orchestration, which is using blockchains to orchestrate things. So Klaster is using pure cryptography to orchestrate things. There is no blockchains. There's nobody's generating blocks in the Klaster network. There is no consensus building. There is none of these things. It's basically an auction market. And I know that now there's Agoric, I guess they're using like Cosmos blockchains to do orchestration, which is an alternative approach. Then what else is there? Yeah, I'd say there's like this solver approach, and there's this on blockchain orchestration approach. There's the near approach, which is like really out there in terms of comparison to others, where they're essentially like they're all in accounts. Like it's you have a near account, and then you have this MPC network which calculates the key for you to be able to sign on Ethereum or Bitcoin. So yeah, one of the like benefits of the near approach is that they can work with non-smart contract blockchains. Klaster can only work with blockchains that support smart contracts. And yeah, I think those are like the major categories of how people are trying to achieve it. Like obviously, I'm the most bullish on our way of doing it, and I can even rationalize why. I think you have to always, when you're designing an engineering system, you have to strike a balance between innovation and familiarity. Like if it's very innovative but completely unfamiliar to developers, then it's going to be difficult to get them to use it. And then if it's very familiar but not innovative at all, you're not going to get any traction because there's not enough benefit for people. So I think like what we try to do is we try to sort of support intents, support ZK proofs, support off-chain execution, off-chain Turing complete composability. All of these things are technically supported in Klaster, but they're not required. When you're getting started, you can just push it like 5 transactions and it'll do it for you. So yeah, I have a feeling that this is something we've been trying to do, is like strike this balance between like being understandable to developers and then actually offering them something that they didn't have before.
Then do you feel like to the untrained eye, they might feel, okay, Klaster is transaction based, but then the solver based approach also supports intents or some of the newer stuff that's on everyone's timeline, basically?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends, what you think intents are. If you say intents are intent-based bridging, then Klaster supports intent-based bridging from the beginning, right? If you think intents are this off-chain execution environments where you can very granularly specify the desired outcomes, then yeah, I think then that's something that I have a feeling is gonna take quite a bit of time to actually push into production. So I'd say right now we're primarily transaction-based. Except for bridging, which is mostly intent based because we need like the super fast bridging. In the future, I'd like to see more focus on fast liquidity fronting for Klaster. However, I'm not sure we're willing to sacrifice support for like EOAs and stuff by like locking up assets and then providing them to intents. Like to me, one of the worst things that happens is like you use something new and then you get some funds on some smart contract account or somewhere, and then they don't work anywhere else. I go to another app and then it's not available. I have to pull it out of the account and everything. To me, that's sort of like this portability and like proper composability with all the apps, with things that came before chain abstraction. That's a must. That's, to me, that's like and like what we try to achieve is that with Klaster, there's no requirement that you actually write some smart contract that like wrap Aave and then it will enable this something. It's all done off chain on the front end in JavaScript, right? So it has to work with all the old applications. It has to work with all the old wallets. It has to work with the entire stack. And then, okay, maybe through time, when as time goes on, maybe we'll say, look, enough users have migrated that we're now able to afford, to maybe push them in a direction where we don't support EOAs anymore or something like that. But that time is nowhere near.
Yeah, I think you have to support EOAs at least at this moment in time. Maybe over a year or over 2 years, you can have a migration path towards like smart accounts or smart wallets. But right now, not supporting EOAs is practically missing out on 80 to 90% of the market, right? So I feel like that's a very rational business decision from you guys.
I agree. I mean, it's there's the only way to get like quick feedback from your customers is if you actually have customers, right? And if you're building for the future, it's I always like to emphasize the danger of living inside your own head. Just having these ideas which run around your own brain, and then you think you're super smart, and you see something that other people don't see. That's super dangerous. It's in business. That's one of the things that will bury you. It's like the primary principle is ship something that people can use today and get them to tell you what's wrong with it, and then just fix that one thing. Don't go all in like 180 pivot or whatever. Don't just be radical. And yeah, that's the core principle behind. And I think like at Li.Fi, you guys are also doing very similar things. I saw with Zaps, it's just built to be compatible with just like a normal off-chain signature wallet, whatever it is. And yeah, of course, it's not as advanced as some like very technically advanced protocols. Of course, it can be because it has to support existing customer base. But then this is something that like a company can use. Okay, we have like Zaps customers, we have our ITX customers, and we speak with them like, oh, what are you missing? What's the exact point? And then when you're building this new innovative thing, you're not building it off of your own thoughts. You're building it off of the feedback of the customers that were using like the version 1 of your product, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of our features, all of our products are built based on customer demand, right? Like any bridge that we add is based on customer demand, B2B or B2C, like listening to users. Zaps as well was built to satisfy certain flows that our customers demanded. And then we would iterate on it depending on what the customers need at that point, right? So it can be fleshed out into a full chain abstraction protocol if that's where the market is headed. But right now it serves a purpose. So that's where we're at. Right. And just out of curiosity, like you mentioned, Near could support Bitcoin accounts and like all of the other chains. To my understanding, all of the chain abstraction protocols right now are largely EVM focused because this is more of a Ethereum-centric kind of thing where the users are fragmented across all of the different chains, and Ethereum feels broken from a user experience perspective. And we see Vitalik talk about this at length, right? So it just feels like chain abstraction fits that need right now, and that's what chain abstraction protocols are building towards. But is that right to assume, or is this concept already gone beyond the EVM chains?
Well, I think like you're right on the money there. So the EVM has an obvious pain point. It's obvious to absolutely everyone. It's just so obvious, and the entire roadmap of Ethereum is going into this roll up as a service, like with Caldera and Conduit and all of these things. So obviously the market's going to develop primarily around Ethereum. Like what I would like to see and what Klaster is striving towards is interoperability across multiple VMs. So I would like to see that you install the Klaster SDK, and then you encode all of your Ethereum transactions, Solana transactions, Near transactions, everything. You push it to the same SDK, the nodes. And this is why composability, which I mentioned to you, is very important, this recursive ability of the tree to do it. Not every node is going to support every blockchain, right? So if you have this orchestration nodes, and then like the orchestration nodes, so this one supports EVMs, this one supports Solana, this one supports Bitcoin. Like in the Klaster way of doing things, they can coordinate, right? This one will say, look, I'm committing to this. This one will say, I'm committing to this. And this one will say, I'm committing to this. And then the commitment of commitments is what you'll actually get at the end. And so that's where I see it going long term. But again, yeah, back to the point, there's no demand from anyone like for this at the current point. So I keep this as a sort of design principle when we're doing technical stuff to keep it in mind. But I would say that you're correct. Right now, the proper pain point only exists in Ethereum. And if you're solving for immediate customers, then it's supposed to be EVM based.
Got it. Makes sense. I mean, that's how bridges also started. Like EVM was the obvious market, but then the order flow on Solana picked up. So now bridges are slowly going. Like every bridge practically wants to go to Solana now because the
Yes.
volume is just too good to miss out on, right?
Yeah, well, I'll say it like, look, one of the benefits that you guys had, and I think which was one of the key drivers for your growth, was the fact that as a user, I don't want to make a conscious choice of, like, if I'm going to Solana, then I'm going to use this bridge. If I'm going to Near, then I just want a bridge from anywhere to anywhere, right? And I think, like, I sort of see Cluster at some points like also aggregation, where it's a lot of separate protocols that are aggregated. And I think this is developers and users, they really need to make as few choices as possible because they already have enough on their plate, as it is. So yeah, that's one maybe additional thing.
I feel like at the core, we're all the same in the sense that we want to aggregate the best components of what's available out there and then
Yes.
abstract it for the users and the developers, right? That's literally everyone's goal towards building.
But if you push like parallels with Web 2, it's very comparable. Like everyone does it. You have Kubernetes. Like I want to deploy my Docker clusters on AWS, but then maybe Azure fixes their pricing and it becomes cheaper. Now I'm deploying there. I don't want to relearn everything. I just want my Kubernetes workflow to be able to do it. I want to load balance across multiple database providers, etc. So in other industries, it's also a given that things have to be aggregated, interoperable, compatible with each other. This is not like I would say, this is not something that's Web3 specific. It's if anything, this is like the most universal thing in engineering that exists.
Yeah. I think another thing that I want to touch on in the chain abstraction ecosystem is like there's a coordinated effort from all the teams to push this vision, right? And I love that because like all of us working together, of course, the message becomes louder. But I feel like at some point there has to be competition, and because everyone is kind of going after the same clients, how do you feel chain abstraction protocols would differentiate in terms of distribution and go-to-market strategies?
So yeah, I think like obviously there is competition. I mean, it's a friendly competition. Like very few people are like extremely like talking bad about others. Maybe in private they are. I'm not sure. But it's I always had a feeling that this entire like kumbaya, everyone's solving for their own piece of the stack. Of course, like we're going to cannibalize each other, and that's fine. We're expecting the market to be large enough to satisfy multiple providers, obviously. And like we depend on each other to an extent. Like Cluster couldn't function without many of the companies, so not everyone's our competition, but some people are the competition. That's natural. I think that's good. Like it keeps you on your toes, and there's always this feeling like, oh, I could have like scored that client, and then some competitor did, and it makes you think. It makes you more. It makes you a bit more anxious, but it makes you more productive. I say, like differentiation. How I see it is. Probably, I would assume it's on which market are you serving. I'm seeing now differentiation between developer tooling, like application-centric, and wallet tooling, which is user-centric. So you have things like Empire, Arcana. You have things like basically Orb Labs, which I have a feeling they're going more towards the user-centric part, where they're trying to integrate with wallets and then do it through the wallet part of the interaction. And then there's us, there's you guys, there's a few other teams who are more focused on the developers and getting the app-centric integrations going. So like that's the first stratification that I see, like the first difference. The second one I think might be like who's serving, and that depends whether that market develops or not, like who's serving more institutional markets, who's serving more like smaller markets. I think there was, I would call it like a difference between, let's say in previous blockchain endeavors, like there would be difference maybe between Alchemy and Moralis, like where Moralis was more focused on like the up and coming players, where Alchemy was really pushing for this enterprise execution. So yeah, I think like it'll stratify against a few verticals. I think one of them is definitely wallets, applications, and then maybe institutional, and then startups, and then I don't know, probably a few more, but nothing comes to mind at this point.
I feel like that's a good framework, right? Like one is going after directly after the users through wallets, and then
Yes,
the other is going after the applications and developers, like the B2B route. And then there's probably like size of customers that people can attract. So that's definitely fair.
exactly.
Uh, in terms of like VC interest, is are you seeing more and more interest in this niche? Because I feel like I first started seeing chain abstraction pop up on the timeline probably 6 months ago. So, what does the VC appetite look like? And feel free to share as much as you want or like as little as you want here.
Well, I can't share a lot, not because I don't want to, because I don't know, to be honest. Like we weren't raising in this period of time, so I didn't reach out to many VCs. I've spoken with a few. It seems to me like tier one VCs are very interested and they're looking at the space. They're very curious about it. So yeah, it's difficult for me to say. If we were raising, then I'd probably have much more information. It seemed like I have a feeling everyone's watching the space. One of the things that I popped out to me through like a casual conversation with some VCs, not who we were not raising from, was that they are very weary of the projects which like these potential vaporware projects where it's a lot of things are being promised, a lot of things are being written about, and then not a lot is being developed. I have seen a couple of projects successfully fundraise in the last few months, which I'm very glad to hear. Yeah, it seems like the pace is picking up, right? You have this entire interoperability thing is becoming quite large, like now with Optimism going all into the superchain stuff, ZK Sync going into the Elastic stuff, Egg Layer being done by Polygon. So I think like the interest is picking up. VCs are probably like a few months, delayed from the early builders. But I think if you have a good product, I don't think it should be a problem to raise, to be honest. Like there is still like everyone's mocking it, but there is still this pent up demand to fund infrastructure. So yeah, I think it shouldn't be a problem if anyone's thinking of joining the space.
Definitely makes sense. And coming back to Cluster, like what is your mission? Like what would you like to achieve in let's say 2 or 3 years? What's the bull case and bear case for Cluster?
So the bull case is we become the default SDK that people install when they're building front ends for blockchain applications or applications that interact with blockchain in any way. Probably like more integration with mobile frameworks, integration with obviously TypeScript SDK, etc. And on the back end of the protocol, the bull case is we become this open source market for service providers where they can coordinate with each other and provide various types of services, including bridging, including intent solving, including transaction relaying, etc. And they all work on this common standard, which is this Merkle tree type object. They all understand it. It's all interoperable with each other. That's what I want to see. That's my end goal, is where if we're able to, and that's why I'm hoping also we're gonna try and push this standard to be as neutral as possible. We don't want it all for ourselves. We want it to be this collaborative effort. And so yeah, my bull case is that this Merkle tree type object, which encodes multiple actions, calls and queries to service providers, etc., becomes a default coordination layer for infrastructure providers in blockchain. And then I call it the bear cases we don't succeed at all, right? And it's just like we close the shop. But let's call it like a successful bear case is that we find a niche in some type of market, and then we do this entire thing ourselves. Our nodes provide all the services. Our nodes just like relay your transactions, etc. That would also be fine. Like we would be sort of satisfied with that. But I think the protocol has much more potential, but it's up to us now to communicate it, because we've been really focused on these early customers now, and we did not really communicate at all these additional possibilities that are available. So yeah, like hoping to in the next few months to jump off this customer education, and then let's see, like in a year maybe it really becomes this whole new vertical where we say, look, off-chain execution is better than on-chain execution, because we are able to easily coordinate multiple players to achieve actions. Right now, like you send your transaction to the RPC node and the RPC node does it. It's very primitive, let's call it. There's no logic there. But like in the future, I see a world where you send it to an orchestrator node, and then the orchestrator knows like pays for your gas, calls the intent solver to get you some funds where you need them, and then calls a relayer which executes your transactions after those funds received, and then down the line maybe calls some off-chain API to write something to the database, and then uses zk-TLS to generate a zk proof, and this all gets verified on chain as like a sequence of actions that you want to achieve. That's where I'd like to see it. And also, like, one of the additional things that we offer, like, is scheduling. This is cryptographically guaranteed scheduling of transactions, subscriptions, repeat transactions, transactions far off into the future. So all of these things, like the execution layer on Ethereum now and generally in blockchains, is very primitive. And we really want to make this execution layer much smarter. And yeah, the bull case is that it actually works.
So bull case is like changing how blockchains and crypto interact in general.
Yeah, the bull case is essentially like what, let's call it, like extracting one more part out of Ethereum is like what data availability did. They said, look, we'll provide it, and then what maybe like what Eigen did, like with staking, like we can also leverage staking in a different way. And then what I would like to see is just like this modularization in more, where we say, look, execution is also getting pushed out of the core blockchain. The core blockchain is just used for consensus, validation, smart contracts, etc. But this interaction of RPC node and the blockchain is just gets abstracted away into a new type of service provider that the developers interact with.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So in terms of building out in the ecosystem, you've just started 6 months, 8 months ago. You're trying to find a place for yourself. What would you say are like some of your challenges that you faced in the early days as a founder and just like as a project that's trying to build a niche for itself?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the initial challenges were getting noticed at all. Like there was a lot of people already in the space talking about a lot of things. We didn't have an audience. We had like 53 followers on Twitter. So I took on a lot of like evangelizing roles on social media, and I like to write, so it's not a problem for me. But then there's always this problem when you are building out a new concept. Like let's say, call it like, I like this comparison with data availability. Initially, when data availability came about, I had no idea what it was. Right? I was like, what do you mean data? Why is this wasn't this how rollups worked? Oh no, rollups actually work like this. So there's this entire educational part that you need to do to educate your customers why what you're building is even important. And then there was a difficult part. Like there was the explaining how and why chain abstraction works. And I'll be honest, like we couldn't get there until we built out a demo. Like until we actually created an application ourselves that demonstrated what it looks like, people just wouldn't understand it. Because you're just another guy yapping on about some weird things on Twitter. So yeah, I say like demo was a pivotal point for us. And then we started getting inbound traffic, and then we started getting customer interest, and then even like some VC interest, like reaching out to us, etc. So that was it. Then I guess the absurd amount of calls that you need to do with people just to get a few people interested. Like people underestimate that like 95% of the calls are a no, and then you just focus on the 5% which are a yes. And yeah, so just as any early stage company, there's a lot of grunt work, and of course funding was a big one. It was through certain grants, through maybe some certain private savings initially, and then we had a partner who helped out on this later on. But there was always a problem. You're essentially, when you're starting out, the company's broke, and then you have to find a way to survive this initial part. And yeah, so like there's a few multiple challenges, but they kind of all interplay with each other. I'd like to say that for us, this happened much quicker than we expected. Like we went from absolutely nothing to, I assume, being one of the recognizable names in the chain abstraction space and vertical within the span of like 8 months. So I've been extremely grateful for this quick growth. And yeah, like it was challenging, but it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly love your project, love the team, because I feel like one, you're building something interesting, and you guys are like super humble for super smart people, right? And I feel just the fact that you're so approachable is a nice thing.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, like it's one of the things I never liked about certain Web3 projects was this intellectual circle jerk where it's I'm an extremely smart person and I know everything and I'll tell you how the world works. And I wanted to write a few days ago on Twitter, like I would say, I think like the crypto Twitter timeline would be much better if I just installed a Chrome extension that in front of every tweet it puts I think, because like people just say this is how the world's gonna work. I'm gonna explain to you what the future of interoperability is like. Right? It's like you think what the future of operability is gonna be like. And so I think like we try to take this approach that we know certain things, but most of the future is unpredictable and could be us, could be somebody else that like pinpoints the niche incredibly. And yeah, so that's I appreciate that it comes through like that.
No, I mean, I totally agree with that, right? Like that there are so many things that are changing. In the last 3 years itself, the ecosystem has completely changed, right? Like now we're literally talking about thousands of chains, where 3 years ago we were just talking about Ethereum and if Solana had a future. So anyone who talks with certainty on Twitter itself, but then who actually knows any of this, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is actually, they're engaging farming like token holders for certain projects, and is this I always say like every few months I come across some type of crypto influencer who has like 400,000 followers, and I've never heard of this person, and I've been in the industry for 8 years. So I think there's this sort of split of who you're communicating with. The people I know about and probably that you know about most is just people hashing out technical stuff, etc. But I can understand how, like, to an average investor in the space, like a token investor / speculator, this is not very interesting. Like, this is very nuanced, very non-bullish thing where it's might work, might not work, who knows. This is very complicated, and so it doesn't bring about a lot of attention. And then these things like, this is how it's going to work, and this is why JP Morgan is going to use my chain, and this resonates with people. I always there's something interesting to mention. I always see how my posts on Twitter perform. Like, the optimistic ones perform 10 times better than the neutral or pessimistic ones. So I have a feeling people like to be told that things are going to be great, and that their convictions are correct. That's something they like to be told the most, I think. And this is that's a danger zone. Like, it's a bias. Yeah.
It's always extremes that work on Twitter, right? Like either you're super optimistic or you're super bearish and have a contrarian take, and it will always blow up.
Yeah, and that was one of the problems. Let's say if actually related to Klaster as a project, like my form of like this evangelizing and everything was difficult also to garner some attention there, because we wanted to like remain neutral in our communication, not to sound shilly or whatever. Then at the end of the day, I sort of realized that it's good sometimes, like if I put the proper qualifiers in the post, like I think maybe or something like that, then it's okay to write about like long-term predictions, how things are going to develop. And this is just, as long as I present it as this is my thoughts, my stream of consciousness, then I consider it to be fine. And this is sort of found an audience that resonates with it. So yeah, I think that's also one thing maybe for projects to think about always is, you have to present this vision of a better future. Otherwise, people are not going to listen to you.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you guys are doing a great job, and I love that you're humble and also neutral in your approach, because you have to be practical as well, right? So really like that about you, and I wish you guys the best. Thank you for taking the time today. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for inviting. It was a pleasure.